Hello, I'm Dr. Charles Knight, and this is the second lecture in my 10 lectures on ecosystem ecology series for my Bio 446 class. That's ecosystem ecology here at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California. I'm part of the Bailey College of Science and Mathematics in the biology department. Here we go. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on this recent paper by Peng, Liu, and Zi, titled Enhanced Causal Effect of Ecosystem Photosynthesis on Respiration During Heat Waves. This was published in Science Advances in 2023 in October. The citation details are there below the title. And it is supposed to, it is paralleling Chapter 5 in our textbook, Principles of Terrestrial Ecosystem Ecology. This paper deals a lot with how temperature affects GPP and ecosystem respiration. So as I do, I'm going to talk about two or three of the authors today. We'll start with Yi-Kui Liu, who was a postdoc at Stanford when I was there back in the 90s. We may have met. I think he was working with Joe Barry at the time. And then he did also a postdoc at UCLA. His PhD was from UC Davis in 1991, and he had a Bachelor of Science from University in China. Since then, he's worked at Northern Arizona University and more recently moved to Cornell, and he set up a lab there at Cornell, and he's been very productive over these years, very enviously productive. And his current research is focused on very trendy topics like how AI could be used to discover terrestrial ecosystem dynamics. That's awesome. From big data and identifying carbon dioxide removal strategies that lengthen carbon residence time. Photosynthesis will remove it, but then if respiration just returns it to the atmosphere, it doesn't do much good. So finding ways to store carbon. And then developing measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification methods to evaluate carbon dioxide removal strategies. So very important research areas Dr. Liu is investigating. Xinjiang Ji is the last author on this paper. He got a PhD at the Institute of Botany and of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. I think that's in Kunming in 2010. I may have been there right around that time. And he got a Bachelor of Science at a different university, and currently he's at East China Normal University in Shanghai. He has broad interests in ecosystem ecology and biogeochemistry, especially under future climate situations. He has conducted global change experiments in grasslands in Inner Mongolia and tall grass prairies in Oklahoma, and now is running a field experiment on coastal wetlands and evergreen broadleaf forests in eastern China. So broadly investigating ecosystem ecology. Really cool topics. The last author on that, I couldn't find much information. Actually, the first author on that paper, I couldn't find much information about. Normally, I would have presented a little bit of information about those authors. A bunch of other authors on that paper too, but most of them are from China. So I don't know many of them, but I think Li Qing and Liu and I probably crossed paths at some point. I just want to introduce some words, some glossary notes before we get started on this paper. Ecosystem respiration, or RE, is the respiration from the ecosystem. It's coming from plants, animals, and soil. And in this paper, we're really just measuring CO2 fluxes. GPP is gross primary productivity, and that's photosynthesis at the scale of ecosystem. It's all of the plant intake of CO2. We're also measuring it from CO2 fluxes in this paper, but largely it's a drawdown of CO2 from the atmosphere. Respiration is the opposite. NEE is net ecosystem exchange, and this is usually measured by CO2 fluxes, or I think I should say always probably measured by CO2 fluxes. We're going to look at NEP as well. That's net ecosystem productivity, but that's more based on biomass. But this paper will deal with NEE. And NEE is simply equal to GPP minus RE. So I'm going to do my take-home points first, and then I'll read the abstract, and then we'll look at the two figures I want to highlight and and it's a cool short paper. I'm hoping to get this recording done in less than 15 minutes, or about 15 minutes, to model what I'm asking my students to do. So again, the title is Enhanced Causal Effect of Ecosystem Photosynthesis on Respiration During Heat Waves. So my first take-home point is that the authors measured GPP and RE from a network of eddy covariance towers in Europe, and those are called the FLUXNET network, and I'll have some pictures of those. Second, they compared GPP and RE in average summer conditions to those during two extreme summer heat waves in 2003 and 2018. 2003 was the hottest in Europe since the 1500s. Wow, that's quite a statistic. Since the 1500s, lots of heat in 2003, and then 2018 was even hotter than 2003. So those were extreme heat waves. As expected, GPP declined during the heat wave summers, so dose makes the poison, temperature, boom, at the high temperature end, GPP started to come down. Big question is, how does ecosystem respiration respond? A lot of people think that respiration just increases exponentially with temperature, but no, they saw a decline in ecosystem respiration in their measurements. So I say, surprisingly, also ecosystem respiration declined too. So heat waves will decrease terrestrial carbon sinks, both because GPP declines, but also because respiration declines. Although you could say, because there's less respiration, more carbon will stay in the soil, so maybe it's just mostly by GPP declining, and I guess that the title pretty much says that, Enhanced Causal Effect of Ecosystem Photosynthesis on Respiration During Heat Waves. They did a lot of modeling in this paper. I'm not going to go into the modeling much. We're going to deal more with the theory at the beginning, and then some empirical observations, and then come back to these take-home points at the end. But first, I'm going to read the abstract like I normally do. So the title again is Enhanced Causal Effect of Ecosystem Photosynthesis on Respiration During Heat Waves. Because of global warming, Earth's ecosystems have been experiencing more frequent and severe heat waves. Heat waves are expected to tip terrestrial carbon sequestration by elevating ecosystem respiration and suppressing gross primary productivity. Here, using the convergent cross-mapping technique, this study detected positive directional causal effects between GPP and respiration in two unprecedented European heat waves. Heat waves enhance the causal effect strength of GPP on respiration rather than respiration on GPP across 40 site years of observations. Further analyses and global simulations revealed spatial heterogeneity in the heat wave response of the causal link strength between GPP and respiration, which was jointly driven by the local climate and vegetation properties. However, the causal effect strength of GPP on respiration showed considerable uncertainties in CMIP6 models. This study reveals an enhanced causal length strength between GPP and respiration during heat waves, shedding light on improving projections for terrestrial carbon sink dynamics under future climate extremes. Pretty dense abstract as usual, but the authors thought a lot about that. They're really talking about the link between GPP and respiration. GPP produces the carbohydrates that then respiration breaks down. The question is how tightly those two are linked together. Plants produce non-structural carbohydrates, and this paper went into that a bit. Basically root exudates that then respiration can more directly act on. So as GPP declines, root exudates will go down, and maybe that is a signature for decreased respiration right away as soon as GPP goes down. That's kind of the theoretical basis for this paper, but we'll go into this theoretical basis more in the next slides. So I just wanted to introduce what an eddy covariance tower is. This is a picture of one. You've got CO2 sensors that are well above the canopy of the plants. Here it's a prairie, so the CO2 sensors are about a meter, probably a meter and a half high. They've got temperature, humidity sensors, radiometers for solar radiation, a couple of wind meters, anemometers, and radiation, and then a rain gauge. Fairly straightforward instrument tower. It's really the math that goes into it all that can then calculate CO2 fluxes. Is CO2 coming off of the soil or coming down into the soil? So you can use these eddy covariance towers to measure carbon dynamics, which we will call NEE, net ecosystem exchange, all over the world. There's a network called FLUXNET. This is that network. I'm showing pictures of various towers in various places, uniform measurement techniques across the world. We're going to study the ones that were in Europe. At these locations, you see some training sites and some test sites. I'm not quite sure why that's important, but there's a bunch of sites across Europe. So this is our first theoretical model, and this is modeled, meaning it's a modeled or just theory. It's not even modeled, it's just theory. You got two different colored lines here and some dashed lines. The colors first, the blue is GPP. The red is ecosystem respiration. The x-axis is temperature in Celsius. The y-axis is a CO2 flux. In this case, it's all positive fluxes, which is interesting. I guess a flux in either direction, because a GPP flux would be going into the plant, which should be a negative flux, but suffice to say it's a flux. And then respiration just increases exponentially. That's in model 1. There's 3 different model types here. Model 1 is it just increases exponentially, ecosystem respiration. Model 2, respiration comes down with GPP, perhaps because there's less root exudates. Model 3 is somewhat modulated. It doesn't come down as fast. So both temperature and root exudates and other factors may be playing a role in respiration. And so this is a classic setup for science where you have 3 or at least a couple different theoretical predictions of what might be happening in a system, and then you use empirical observations to test which of these scenarios is more likely. But these data combine to produce models of ecosystem respiration. So importantly, these 3 simulations vary in how ecosystem respiration changes with temperature. Note that the standard model 1, ecosystem respiration increases exponentially with temp. That's important. Keep that in mind. These are the net ecosystem exchange or net CO2 exchange on the x-axis predictions from those previous predictions on the previous page. Temperatures on the x-axis here, and this is just net ecosystem exchange. If it's positive, then there's a carbon sink. See the green letters at the top? That's a carbon sink. If it's negative, it's a carbon source. So the landscape is now a carbon source instead of a sink. So these again are the modeled responses of ecosystem respiration and GPP to predict CO2 fluxes, and these 3 simulations vary by how ecosystem respiration changes with temperature. Model 1 is where it increases exponentially forever. 2 and 3, 2 is where ecosystem respiration comes down, and that allows carbon to continue to be sequestered in the landscape. The terrestrial carbon sink goes away at lower temperatures with the standard model, and at higher temperatures too, I should say. I'm surprised I put lower there. But more importantly for this paper, modeling higher temperatures. Look at where the solid line crosses the x-axis around 20 degrees Celsius. That's when the landscape becomes a source of carbon and not a sink anymore. That's an important tipping point for ecosystems. These are their observed data from flux towers across Europe in normal years and heat waves. So there's tons of data that go into this figure. I don't know how they summarized and simplified it so much. Every dot is a different observation at a different temperature. They must have billions of observations at different temperatures. We're looking at the summer and the heat wave. And so there's a difference, and I would have liked it if they'd put these 2 graphs over top of each other, maybe just looked at GPP by itself in the normal year and the heat wave so you could compare them directly. but they didn't, so I got to put on some lines here. So these are the observed responses of RE and GPP and CO2 flux. So they're real observations. They're not modeled or theoretical anymore. But what we can see is that GPP declined in the heat wave. And I'm going to make this a little bit more obvious by adding a line here. From the peak in the normal years, I just drew that line over to the heat wave year. You can see the reduction in the mean. It's gone down quite a bit. The solid line would be the mean. So GPP has gone down, and you can see it extends out to 30 degrees Celsius, where in normal years it doesn't extend. Those temperatures just aren't there. 21 Celsius is about the warmest it gets for these towers, but in those heat wave years it got up a lot warmer, and these are atmospheric temperatures. Now we can look at ecosystem respiration and how it also declined. Putting the dotted line over there, put the dotted line in brown here for respiration. You see that ecosystem respiration also declined. It didn't increase with elevated temperatures. It actually decreased. So the standard model, Model 1, is wrong. I'll go back to the take-home points. The authors measured GPP and RE from a network of eddy covariance towers in Europe, and that's the FLUXNET towers. They compared GPP and RE in average summer conditions to those during two extreme summer heat waves, 2003 and 2018. 2003 was the hottest one in Europe since 1500. 2018 was even hotter. As expected, GPP declined in the heat wave summers, and surprisingly, I say, surprisingly to me, ecosystem respiration also declined, which is good and bad. Good and bad. Good because less respirations means more carbon stays in the soil. Overall, though, the heat wave was very traumatic for Europe. Number 6, heat waves will decrease terrestrial carbon sinks, both because GPP declines, but also because RE declines. I think I should reword that. If RE declines, that actually helps the terrestrial carbon sink. I should reword that, but I'm not going to re-record this because I don't have time before class. Class is coming up here in just a few minutes. So that's it for this.